pretty recent foray into the hospital. So
yes, and I just want to, for those of us that have heard the beginning of this episode, I just want to pull my chart.
Wow.
I'm gonna read my procedure.
Wait, all that paperwork for a toe?
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's a toe for crying out loud. I think isn't it like your little toe, like just a pinky toe?
Excision.
Why do they? I don't know why they don't just cut the toe off. I think that would just be.
It's the one that goes wee 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 wee
all the way home.
All the way home.
This little piggy.
This one.
Excision. That's a good word. That's a good that holds some clout. Excision of soft tissue tumor on right foot, on the side of the right foot.
On the side of the right foot.
Yeah, there's no toe in there at all.
There's no toe. Wow.
There's no excision of tumor.
Why did you tell us it was just your toe?
I never mentioned toe. I never
must have been under the influence of the drugs when you told us that.
Yeah.
You must have.
And so I didn't realize that I was going to have to be on crutches until the very last minute. It said no weight bearing for 48 hours.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, am I going to do a mad dash for crutches? So a friend of mine.
Did they give you crutches in the hospital when you left?
No, they said BYOC, bring your own crutches.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know what's happening over here.
This was not Cedars-Sinai. Can we just say?
It was not. And thank goodness I didn't need a PICC line. But so I borrowed crutches from a 12-year-old. And so they're ever so slightly too short.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to say, like, that's kind of tough to be like, it's like you're bent over like you're 90 years old. Like just to have, I would just want to hop. If that's the crutches I got to use.
Well, and I'm on the upper level. There's someone below me. So I'm like, okay, I've dropped the crutches 12 times. And when I do try to hop, so yeah, that's a whole thing. But getting ready this morning, like I get up early, I go to the bathroom, brush my teeth, and an hour later, I have about 10 minutes. Yeah, takes forever.
It does.
I just want to be clear, it's not my toe. Go ahead, Kurt. I want to hear.
No, I'm. It's like a lot of things. Like you injure your shoulder or your wrist, or you have this kind of thing happen, and suddenly you become aware of all the things that now take like an extra 2 hours to do, just because they put me to sleep for 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I made coffee, and then I'm like, how do I get my cup of coffee and my body over to that chair?
Oh my gosh.
But I did it. Yeah.
Well, we trust that the path report will come back as we want it to. And
yes.
Yeah.
Well, and what I loved, Kurt, that you mentioned, I don't think we usually mention the name of the podcast on the recording, but when you said this is the Being Known podcast.
Yeah.
And like, even this doesn't have to do with trauma, but like scheduling my surgery. I yesterday was really my only option unless, or 3 weeks from now. But I thought, okay, we're recording. I would rather do it a different time. Like I would rather do my surgery, not the day before we're recording.
Right.
I had to, then I thought, I don't know if we're going to be, I didn't know what condition I'd be in this morning. And it was like, just all of that at one time would have given me tremendous anxiety. Like I've got to know if I can be on, I've got to have it together, not be in a sweatshirt. And I'm like,
right. Obviously you're not worried about that today.
I have settled in to my comfort level is very high.
Go, Pep. I know. I see it. I see it.
That fruit's hanging so low, it's dragging on the ground. I'm just going to leave that one there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't pick up rotten fruit off the ground. I mean, I will go for the low hanging.
You have your.
I have my standards.
Standards, yes. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh.
So, what any other takeaways, Aim, from the episode?
Yes, that wasn't my only.
Aside
takeaway.
your toe.
My toe. Yeah.
Aside your toe.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wrote down the quote, but the hospital the church is a hospital. Healing in the presence of war. Oh my gosh. And I thought, if it's anything less than that, it is not the church that God intended.
Right.
And I thought of, so I grew up in Northern California, Petaluma. Between the age of 6 and 8, my grandparents, who were hugely influential in my life, would take me to church every Sunday morning and usually Wednesday night. And it was a church up on a hill. There was this big driveway that led up to the church and it had a big field in front. And almost every Sunday morning, I remember Mr. Bond was the pastor, and he would always be out front greeting everybody. And I remember just opening the door and leaving Grandma and Grandpa and my sister behind. And I would just dash up the walkway to Mr. Bond. And he would pick me up. He would hug me. And it felt like he had waited. He'd been waiting there until Amy Chella got here. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is my first memory of the healing of church, because things were a little bit wonky at home. And so this was like, oh my gosh, he is so excited I'm here. And, you know, that's not everybody's experience. And I'm thinking, that is the church. It to a little 6-year-old, you know, that doesn't even know she needs it.
Right. Well, I think about, you know, I think about the notion that in the body of Jesus' first disciples, you've got the apparently appointed leader who betrays him utterly. And then you have, you know, I love already, if you're watching, if you're following The Chosen, you know, at some point, you know, we're introduced to the other character who also betrays him. And the other character who betrays him, Judas, you know, we are already being given this sense that this is a guy of deeply sincere faith and longing. This is a guy who really, really wants to do the right thing. And, you know, betrayal, I'm just saying, like, betrayal happens in the heart of Jesus' own community. Like, you've got Jesus himself in a community that himself, over the course of 3 years, can't prevent betrayal from happening. And so, you know, we who, you know, it's easy to imagine, gosh, if it was only Jesus who were in charge, and we would say, like, well, Jesus was in charge, and even there, the behavior of those who were in the inner, one of whom was in the inner circle, throws him under the bus. And this is what happens when we are willing to put ourselves in the path of vulnerability, in this space where, you know, where Mr. Bond meets us. And there is that certain risk that we take, which is all the more reason why vigilance is so necessary for us. And it's tricky. I mean, I take care of a lot of people these days for whom, like, this is the central traumatizing theme of their life. The life that they lived in the family of God, where really horrific things have happened. Not just when they were kids, but even now. Like, they're happening right now as adults.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
Well, and then that makes me think of the M&M board. And when you were talking about that, I thought, oh my gosh, it's not a shame board.
Right.
They're allowed to talk about, and they're welcome and have freedom to talk about what went amiss, what they should have done differently, and what shouldn't have happened. And that's our only hope, right?
Well, and it's got to be in place from the beginning. It's got to be in place from the beginning, because you can't go in and do all this damage to people and then say, okay, well, let's put together this M&M board. And I mean, I think the M&M board the purpose of it is to stop it from happening.
Right.
to make it a healthier place,
Right.
Right.
Not just look back,
not
but
just
to
look back. Right.
preventative, not
Right.
repair only.
Right. But this is the other thing though too. Like the M&M board exists not just to anticipate and prevent things. The M&M board exists because they assume it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But it is, but the point is, and this is where, if we have something, if we have these kinds of relational matrices in place where people are known, it means that if you are practicing being on the lookout, if you're practicing vigilance, you're far more likely to catch things when they are in their infancy. Where yes, people might get hurt. Yes, people might, something might happen to which we would say, "Oh my gosh, I did that. I'm gonna we're gonna repair that rupture right now." Or I had like a physical encounter with one of my parishioners. I'm a male pastor. I had a physical encounter with a female parishioner that, yeah, I probably that was probably too, word came back from an elder that when Kurt, when whoever hugged me, it didn't feel right. I'm like, okay, I gotta have people who will say okay, what's going on? What's happening? And to be able to say, yep, yeah.
And that requires all of us to be awake, alert, and attuned.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't. Again, this is tricky because you want to be careful and not somehow communicate that the victims are responsible for their own trauma. Right. This is one of the more common things that then happens in. Countless. I can't count the number of times in which I've taken care of people who something happens to them in the church. They try to bring it up. They try to address it. And, the leadership just doubles down and communicates the message that, well, if you'd only done this or you'd not done that,
My gosh.
then, this is not an uncommon experience for people to have. And so again, I think, anymore, if you were to build a new hospital, you wouldn't build it and start to practice and then wait and see if something's going to show up and then decide, yeah, I think we need an M&M board.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So to your point, Pepper, if you're going to build a hospital, one of the first things that you'll do organizationally is establish how are we going to lead the charge at being attuned and vigilant with all the things that are going to go wrong here. Because it's like, if it's true that evil does its best work in the middle of good work being done, then we would expect, that's what I was saying earlier, but why would we be surprised that some of the most painful things that we imagine happening to human beings happens in the very place where the best work is being done?
Yeah.
And so, but kind of like in our current cultural setting, we have to be careful about this, because in our current cultural setting, becomes easy. Being a victim is very attractive. I'm now at a point where if I am distressed because I didn't get an A on my grade in my college, my parents will who donate money to the college will write and say the professor needs to give my daughter an A because my daughter can't tolerate getting a B. Right? I can't, I'm a victim of that. I'm easily offended. I am fragile. And so that is a thing that is happening at the same time that these other real traumas are happening. And we have to be aware that, and again, I get back to Dan Allender's, I think really poignant and provocative comments in one of his chapters in the very first book that put him on the map, The Wounded Heart. This notion that we actually have to, even as victims, even as real, I have to repent from my practice of how I respond to having been traumatized, because a lot of what I will end up doing is I will tell myself lies. I will be in agreement with all these kinds of things. And I will also continue to make other people responsible for my ongoing emotional distress 20 years later.
Right.
And so it's tricky, because we have to find the line between, we have to name where the trauma has happened. And at the same time, I then have to recognize that I have work to do in the healing process. And that healing process itself is going to require energy and effort. Like, it's not going to be a walk in the park. And it becomes easy for me then to still hold responsible my predator, the person who hurt me, hold them responsible for everything that is now difficult about the work that I have to do. And it's really tricky. And so that
is
whole
tricky.
process,
That is
Yeah.
tricky. I mean, it's
Uh-huh.
yeah.
yeah,
I just have great empathy for somebody who has been abused in a way, you know, in that fashion. And it's hard to, I know it's hard for people to separate, that incident that happened with all the other things. It's really hard, right?
Yeah.
Because,
Yeah.
you see this as the impetus of what's caused all your problems.
Right.
And,
And it is true. This is the other thing that is true that makes it all the more tricky. And that is that, in my experience, it is far more often the case that when a person experiences this kind of traumatic encounter within the church, unfortunately, is far more often the case that those parties who were responsible are not willing to take responsibility, are not willing to come back and repair the rupture. And so in some respects, it does make that, in and of itself, though what the predator does, what the powermonger does, is not in and of itself now the story of the victim. The victim is going to have to decide, what am I going to do with my story? It is still the case that when the abuser does not acknowledge or repent, it does make the work of those who have been victimized that much heavier, that much more difficult. And this is the piece that I think that is most, weighty and hard for me when I'm working with people who are in a system, who are in a church that I'm probably familiar with because it's in my area, and we get people that are coming from all kinds of places, and the church leadership simply does not take responsibility for what has taken place, and it's maddening.
yeah.
That would make all the difference, right?
It would make it would, and this is the thing, like the church leadership is often very unaware of the potential for, the potential for unbelievably beautiful things to come out of this if you would only be willing to actually do the work of repentance yourself.
Mm.
But, the very fact that these kinds of things happened in the first place is kind of part and parcel of the pattern of those folks who were in those positions of power.
Mm.
And, they didn't get there overnight.
Right.
And so, and so unless they themselves are also willing to do the hard work of asking the question, what happened to me, so that I can figure out what I've now done to others, it becomes really, really, really difficult.
Yeah. I think next season we take on joy. Laughter.
Well,
happiness.
right. Well, like we said,
Right.
like we said, it takes less than 3 seconds to experience and embed shame in our neural networks, and it takes about 60 to 90 seconds to do the same with joy. And so we figure, well, it's going to take a lot of time, so we should take. I think you're right. Every single episode.
Every episode.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you for today.
Good.
Feel
Thank
better,
you.
Amy.
Thank
Right
you.
on.
Take care of that
Yeah.
little,
I'll
this
take
little
care of my
piggy goes to
toe.
market.
Yeah.
Take care of that
piggy
toe.
goes to home. This little piggy
Oh
goes
my gosh,
wee,
I'm
wee,
ending
wee,
recording.
wee,
We're done.
all the way
We're done.
home.